good, mate. You are looking sharp. We're laughing already before we even started. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And I am chuffed to have Sam Crome with me today. If you don't know Sam, he does loads of stuff in education. He's got a really interesting background, which I no doubt he'll talk to us about. Most recently, you probably know him about, from his work on Teams. And we're going to find out a bit more about the leader behind the leadership. You were just joking before we came on that Sam asked if he was too casually dressed, but I said no. And I also want to know what it's an American football top I think you're wearing, isn't it? What team is it?
Yeah, it's the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah, that's my team.
The Minnesota Vikings. There we go. It's a good way to start. So welcome to everybody to the podcast. And again, as you know, this is a combination of different elements that aims to get behind the leader, that we might not know actually. And some of the stuff that Sam's chosen will let us do that. And so we'll start off really with the fast friends question, which the first one you've chosen is, what would be your perfect day? So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's really great to be here as well. And also just to lift the curtain for the viewer/listener, the way that Chris puts his podcast together is awesome because the questions are really varied and interesting and make you really think before you even come on the pod. So I was like, bloody hell, there's a lot of stuff to think about here.
Yeah.
Normally I just turn up and people are like, yeah, so tell me about teams. And
yeah, exactly.
Your stuff is very, very interesting. So thanks for having me on, Chris.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid, I feel like this answer is going to be really boring. But when you're slightly, I don't know if you are, Chris, but so I would never assume about anyone, but if you're slightly introverted and you work in education,
yeah,
and you don't draw your energy from crowds and speaking, that saps a lot of your energy. That's the case for me. Like, having been a sort of pastoral deputy head for 5 years, I kind of pride myself on walking around and around that school from 8:30 till 4 o'clock, just talking to people all day and making it look like that is my natural default setting.
Yeah.
And the truth is, every time I see another group of kids walk towards me, I know exactly how to connect with them, and I know I love doing that. But equally, I'm like, okay, right, here's another one. Let's give a bit more of another percentage of the kind of the cake to these people to make sure they have a good day. So my perfect day is actually, I'd probably go for like a really long walk and take a classic novel and just sit and read for like 3, 4, 5 hours without any like dialogue or speech coming from my person. And honestly, it would take that amount of time just for the spring to kind of unwind a little bit, that I really, really need that. And then it means I can be all things to all people for the next day and the day after. But the perfect day for me is that quiet and that recharge so that I can kind of go again. Is that really dull? I feel like that's really dull.
Yeah, no, I don't think that is dull. And I think that will resonate with loads of leaders because I think we're all, as you said, that kind of, I think probably there are more introverts than extroverts. And if they are extroverts, it might be people like me and you, it's not our natural state. I don't like the idea that it's pretend or it's a show, because I do genuinely enjoy being around people. But I think you're right, given the choice, I'd spend more time on my own. And I think the important thing that comes from what you just said is that if what Sam's saying resonates with you and you're not finding a way to uncoil that spring or recharge the battery, then probably you need to, because you need to almost start each day fresh, I suppose.
I think you have to get to that point in your life where you're super conscious of who you are as a person, and like also whether it's like a friend or a partner, you can say like, look, this is what I actually need to kind of to get back on the horse again tomorrow. So and not like, I remember in my sort of 20s sort of making feeble excuses with my friends about why I wasn't going out on the weekend, and now I'm just like, look, I'm really sorry, I'm just antisocial and I just want to stay at home.
Oh man, that is so funny. I have the same thing. Yeah. Do you know what? This is slightly random, but have you ever seen that Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man?
Yeah.
Yes. when you have to keep saying yes all the time.
I
I
read
feel
the
like that
book
would.
actually. I read the guy a guy I went to university was obsessed with Danny Wallace, who
Okay.
he's a comedian, who English comedian actually. I think
Yeah.
he's actually from the maybe from the West Country, maybe. But
Amazing.
anyway, he wrote loads of great kind of comedic books
Right.
with another guy called Dave Gorman, and yeah, they that was a really awesome book. So yeah, I'm all over that one. Yeah.
I love that. And we're not going to talk about this launchpad sadly today, but of course that idea of introvert extrovert. I was amazed when I tripped over this term ambivert,
Mm.
where someone has characteristics of both introversion and extroversion, and I thought, oh, I think that might be me. Well, we've been so excited about talking to each other, and I got so excited about you turning on. I haven't even given you a chance to explain what your role is and where you work. Tell us some more about that.
Yeah, okay. So I've been a secondary deputy head for 5 years now, just coming to the end, and I'm actually just finishing that role. Um Last year I took on a trust wide role across our sort of 20 sort of two-ish schools, doing director of education mainly for secondary schools. We've got four of those, and then our Catholic mission and ethos, and then the people strategy as well for our trust. So I began by doing that 1 day a week, and 4 days as deputy, and then this year I flipped it round, and we kind of did a transition year out of my deputy headship, and that's been really cool. And I was all geared up to be doing full-time trust work next year for the first time, but I've accepted an interim headship at a primary school actually in September.
Cool.
So once again, everything has flipped around and changed without any warning. But I'm really up for the challenge and looking forward to helping out a school that's actually not in my trust at the moment, but it'll be really interesting to take on that project. So I'll be back in school full time and in the head teacher seat for the first time as well.
I love that. Yeah, and wow, what an interesting challenge. And do you, I mean, as I said, we've briefly talked about this before, but do you get that sort of, are people expecting you to be the expert at running teams? Sort
No, basically in Surrey, I've made a point of never ever speaking about my
of,
book, conferences, because no one wants like a sort of like Billy Big Bollocks.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
They want to know that you run their school or their organization really, really well, and that's all you're focusing on the whole time. So, hopefully, like no one's expecting anything other than me just to be a really committed leader in their school, because I make a habit of just never really raising that at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, in a strange link, we had our trust-wide conference last week, and I got asked to do a keynote at it off the back of the confidence book. But of course, the message you're sending is, yeah, no, I wrote this book, and people are like, how has he written that book whilst doing his job? Like, I had to explain it took me like 5 years to write it, and it was done from like 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. every day. Hilarious. Well, that's a great way to start. And so, for those that aren't haven't heard before, the next thing we talk about is these things called ignition points, and they're kind of moments in people's lives that create some sort of transition or transformation. And lots of us had them, and Sam's chosen two to talk about today. And so, yeah, so tell us a bit about the first one you've chosen. It was adoption.
Yeah, so I chose adoption, and it's something that I probably never really thought about or spoke about until I was kind of in my mid 30s. So I'm trying to get better at now, actually engaging with it more. So I was adopted as a baby from pretty dire circumstances, to be honest. The kind of thing you might expect to see in a safeguarding team, and you're thinking, "Wow, what's gone on there?" And but interestingly, I kind of had really great adoptive parents actually and the advice is or was like tell your adoptee like regularly from the time they're a baby onwards that they are adopted, so they never have that big like, well, hey, here's the kind of the extravaganza event sort of thing. So I don't have a memory of being told, which I think is a really cool way of doing it. So you don't have that kind of questioning or like sense of betrayal or anything like that. But to be honest, I really sort of repressed the whole idea of being adopted until, well, probably I was in my 20s. And I don't know what the process is now, but what I had to do in Surrey was contact Surrey County Council and request my adoption file. And that was like buried at the bottom of Kingston upon Thames Town Hall somewhere, and it took about 6 months for them to find, like, brush off the cobwebs in the tub.
Yeah.
And then you have to go and have like a one-to-one meeting with a social worker and just go through
Wow.
your whole file. And there's some really like gnarly stuff in there. Like, I had like psych reports of my biological parents, which had like confidential and stuff written on them, and
Really?
which I felt like I shouldn't really be allowed to see. But
No.
so you go through everything, and then the social worker's like, like, are you okay?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sad. I'll just take this folder home. But anyway, for me, it was a really great. It was a really great way to think about my identity, to start exploring aspects of myself and my kind of my makeup and my flaws. But it was also actually a bit of a, hence the ignition point choice. It was a bit of an ignition point to remember that I was actually adopted, and I was essentially rescued from really difficult circumstances, and thinking, well, I basically won the lottery,
Yeah.
because, well, where would I be if I hadn't been
Oh
adopted?
my God.
God knows. So it really got me thinking, well, you've got to work in some sort of public service where you help someone else not win the lottery, but you help
Yeah.
someone else through a difficult time that otherwise they might not be able to climb out of themselves. Um, so that was one of the inspirations behind going into something like teaching.
Yeah.
It's something that I still, you know, I've got no doubt that I've probably got many, like, probably attachment issues. Well, I mean,
Sure.
everyone's
Oh yeah.
wrestling with some stuff. But it's something I try to engage with quite a lot, because it's really important, I think, and as you get older, you become hopefully more accepting of yourself, but you start thinking about aspects of yourself in different ways, and you're not even aware that you're doing that, especially when you have kids and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, for me, I've tried to turn it into like a strength and something that gives me inspiration to go and help others, and also it's been really useful for relating to other people as
Of
well.
course.
Especially when sometimes people hear my voice and they go, "Oh, posh twat from Surrey." Sorry, I probably can't swear on this, can I? Yeah, sorry, guys. Hopefully I just haven't just created a post-editing beep
Listen,
job.
I'll put it in there. And he swears like clickbait, don't they? Everyone wants to.
You have to put the little E on the podcast website,
Oh, yeah,
explicit
I will.
content.
18. This was 18 certified.
I did that after I interviewed Jenny Webb, I think.
I love it. I love it.
But yeah, so I think it's helped me connect with people, because sometimes it's easy to assume we know someone's background, and maybe we don't. And yeah.
Yeah. Have you shared that with like colleagues at all?
So not for the most of my career, but in the last few years, I was like, right, it's not so much about colleagues, but it's more about the kids. Like, actually, I've got to show the kids that something like this that could have been a deficit is actually a superpower. So I started talking about it in assemblies more, just to kind of open the door for conversations. Like, if someone feels like they don't belong, if they feel a bit different, if they feel like there's no place for them, like hey, I've been there. And like, let me just tell you, it's normal for everyone to feel like that, whether you're adopted or not, or whatever your circumstances are. So I've kind of, I don't labour it. So I think, like, I plotted out of my school which year groups I'd said it to and which I hadn't. So I wasn't like going back in and going, oh, here's that sub
There it
story.
goes. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's really important to be honest. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm forever, reminded of the power of showing a bit of yourself to other people and what that does to their feelings of connection with you. And again, if you can find some mutual connection, then that builds it even deeper. And yeah, I think kids naturally gravitate to people that they see a connection to, and they want it to. I don't know whether they see us as different. I mean, I'm lucky in that I teach in an area where my accent is very well written. They're like, "I'm sure you're from around here, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." About 100 meters down there, and well, that's really interesting. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I'm sure there'll be listeners out there who are in similar situations who find a connection.
It's just funny,
Um,
because I remember as a teenager when I kind of repressed it, thinking, oh, like, why do I have to be like this? Why do I have to have this background? And then as you get older, you're like, actually, like, this is a strength. This
yeah,
this has been character building, and it helps me relate to things that I might not. So, but it's just fun, isn't it? As you go from being a teenager upwards, you kind of you just have a bit of a different perspective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, brilliant. Well, the next bit, again, for new listeners, is that we ask guests to select 2 launch pads from the Leadership Launchpads book that resonate with them. And so we're going to go to the first one. I'm going to just get the screen up for those that are
I
watching
just
this.
say to the listeners, this was no easy job, because Chris has plotted out all of the ones that have been done before, and it's like
Yeah.
it's 50 numbers. So I was frantically flicking through his
Resisting.
book, going, "Nope, can't do that one, can't do that one."
Yeah. And I promise it's not a way to get people to look through the whole book. Um, I think I'm going to sack that off now because we're 26 episodes in, and so the chances of people finding one that I think I'm just going to let that go. But so what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk through kind of what I was thinking when I made this launchpad, and then we'll ask Sam why it resonates particularly with him. And the first one that he's chosen is this idea of kind of leaders eat last, which for me came about off of some more reading of Simon Sinek's work. People will be familiar with kind of leaders eat last. And he went on to do some sort of extra work around a bit of kind of psychological safety, I suppose. But the thing that got me really thinking was this idea that effective leaders, they often keep their opinions to themselves until everybody else has spoken. And that can lead to quite a range of benefits. And so some of the things that come through in the research are fascinating around if a leader, I don't say you have to, it's almost about like just resisting, just being a bit, just holding back a little bit. It maximizes the amount of input from others and the different voices. A lot of times people filter themselves because of what a leader has said. Certainly if that leader is in a sort of an upper hierarchical position, people feel like, they want to align with that leader. Another thing, of course, is that if we listen to others, naturally we increase our own awareness and understanding. It's fairly straightforward, isn't it? That if we're the ones speaking first and then everybody else is filtering, there's a chance that we're not listening and not hearing the real truth. And of course, that's not good for us because that ultimate thing of if you misdiagnose, then you mistreat, or if you don't understand the right problem, then you're dealing with the wrong problem. And so another thing that they do, and this is something that I tripped over in my doctor actually, is this idea of social desirability bias. So it's another one of those cognitive biases that suggests that we are almost unconsciously programmed to respond in socially desirable ways. And a lot of times that means not disagreeing or challenging and stuff like that. And so if we always speak first, then we sometimes reduce the level of honesty and kind of vulnerability. Obviously that builds confidence. The more people feel like they've got a voice and they belong and all those things, and when they do share or be vulnerable, nothing negative happens. That puts them in this kind of confidence spiral where they then feel they can offer again. When you get into it though, it's really interesting because of course the tagline says leaders speak last, and of course that's a bit of again clickbait, but there's something around not kind of not making sure that leaders, they're not passive during the discussion. So they're not being kind of listening or anything like that. They are facilitating others. So they're not leading, but they're facilitating others. And so another thing that they need to kind of be able to do, I'm just going to hold on a second. Leaders should really be asking questions to deepen their understanding. So although we're suggesting that they speak last, we're not suggesting that they are completely silent or passive. The other interesting thing is that it's not as easy as them. There are some negatives to the leader having the last word, because people can feel like, oh, okay, there's no more room. And then the other thing, of course, people need to be mindful of is just because in your mind, you're thinking, don't speak, let other people speak. If you're sat there with a massive frown on your face and your arms all folded, you might be signifying through your body language that you're not open to stuff. So there's a little bit of a kind of, a run through of the Launchpad and some of Simon Sinek's thinking. But why did it resonate with you, Sam?
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? I love Simon Sinek's work, and sometimes I think you could probably accuse him of over sound biting. Like he's
Mm,
great at sound bites, um, but actually he's a really reflective person, and he has a great podcast called I think it's called A Bit of Optimism or words to that effect, and it's really great. And I find him really kind of compelling in that. And there's more to it than just the clickbait, as you know, as you kind of said about leaders eat last, etc., etc.
yeah,
For me, this comes back to um, my belief that the greatest toxic trait of a team is that there's not honest, open willingness to express views and ideas, and that there's no point getting a group of people together who all know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff if they're not going to be able to express their views. And um, so that's why it spoke to me to begin with. And when I did a podcast episode with Doug Lemoff, who actually we hung out with him, didn't we,
we
recently?
did. Fantastic. Yeah,
um,
that was cool.
that was fun. And he talked about how we were talking about how in group meetings, um, dominant voices take over, and he said, "Yeah, but also you've got this concept of the tyranny of the first response,
Right.
which basically means that confident people or leaders often speak first in group discussions, and then for loads of reasons that kind of becomes the group's accepted truth or avenue, and then it's almost too late to pull back and go, actually, should we just go from scratch? What other ideas are there? Because you've already started unwinding for the options of the first idea or the second idea or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it really made me think that some leaders have been taught to lead by show your strength, show you know stuff, dictate the discussion first, so people can see that you're setting this compelling direction. But for all the reasons you just talked about, that doesn't really allow the rest of the group to express themselves openly, because if their leader, they're keen to impress, and they want to think the leader thinks that they're competent, if the leaders express something and it's quite contrary to your view and they've spoken first, then as if you're going to raise your hand and say, "Oh, sorry, mate, I think exactly the opposite. What are you on about?"
Yeah.
You might do, because that might be your personality type, but actually the research kind of shows that often people don't put themselves in that position where that would be an interpersonal risk to their place in the team, right? So, um, but I guess the headline is, and this kind of links to what we'll talk about later on about coaching, is that you just have to, as a leader, sometimes quash that voice in your head saying, "I've got an idea, I should say that right now," and
Yeah.
just let it play out for a bit. And my current head teacher is amazing at that. He's so good at kind of neutral listening position during SLT meetings, which means that we can discuss as a group without worrying about which direction he's going to try and lead us in, because he really listens first. And I think it's very easy to underestimate that as a leadership quality and think, well, you're just sitting there. um, but actually, he's probably his whole time thinking, right, I've got to just let them talk for a bit and see what the everyone's participation is across the group. So I think it's sounds super easy and soundbitey, but it's actually really hard to achieve.
Yeah. And I think, like most things, it probably won't come naturally. And so it does require a bit of practice. And you won't get it right the first time. And it might even be worth, I'm thinking out loud now, it might even be worth talking to, if you lead a team, it might be worth talking to your team about this sort of stuff and how you are purposefully going to be doing this and the rationale behind it, so that they can, again, like you just joked about, sort of not think, God, Chris is quiet today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the other thing I would hasten to add is that I'm a big believer in lots of leadership kind of approaches. So whether it's kind of sometimes might be more kind of authoritarian, sometimes more distributed. But teams do need some compelling direction from a leader. Like, there's a great anecdote from um, Richard Hackman, who's like a team's god, from the sort of 80s and 90s in America. And he talks about how a group of friends are going up a mountain, and they get to base camp, and the next morning they can choose one of like 5 different peaks to climb, and each peak has got different things about it that are good or not so good, reasons you would choose it. But they're all a group of friends, so they spend hours and hours debating which one they'll climb, and then the weather conditions mean that they can't
Oh,
climb any. And he uses it as a point to say we have to have open discussion, and but there also has to be someone setting the compelling direction. Um, so I think this is all really important, but I also don't advocate for teams where there's just completely open sort of place the whole time for people to pull off and do their own thing. That there has to be some sort of and you won't always reach 100% consensus with an open conversation, and that's okay as well. It's the process that's important, that everyone had the voice, and we reached the direction based on those discussions.
Yeah, I love that. And I always think sometimes, I haven't been in an interview for a while, but I feel like my stock answer to anything someone was trying to say, which is better, would be, well, it depends. You know, it would be like really vanilla. Well, it depends. But actually, you find life and leadership and everything so complex and nuanced that there will always be, a sweet spot, I suppose, somewhere. Brilliant. All right. Well, let's keep cracking on then. So the next thing we're going to talk about is another fast friends question. And this one's, I can't wait for, it's fascinating. It says, is there something that you've dreamed of doing for a long time? And I guess, why haven't you done it? Tell us a bit about
So I'm going to hedge my answer and go for a two-parter.
All right.
When I was when I was younger, and I was probably in my teens and going through that kind of identity crisis that I was hinted at earlier on, my big thing was like, oh, you've got to do like an epic trip. And I've done a few epic trips in my time, but my big one was like, I'll do like a road trip across the States.
Mm.
And I know that America is probably not the most idealistic kind of place to go at the moment for kind of social and political reasons, but the landscape in America, I would just love to just go from east to west or west to east,
Yeah.
or do a big loop and see a bit of everything, and just go across and just kind of ride those highways kind of thing. So that's one thing. But the second thing is, I've always wanted to write two types of book. So I know I've written a book, and that's really cool, and that's that was definitely a life ambition kind of ticked off. But I've always really wanted to write a fiction, a novel. And I've
Okay.
got pretty close a couple of times, but kind of fallen out of love with the draft.
Yeah.
But I would love to write, and I'm sort of thinking about how I can, the next kind of, I don't know if you've read The Culture Code,
Yeah.
Daniel Coyle. That kind of book is like what really got me into the whole thing of kind of team leadership and teams. And I've got a few ideas to how to kind of use a more niche approach to that. But I'd love to have time at some point, if I ever have, like, I don't know, a sabbatical or something, to go
Yeah.
and look at teams in other workplaces and other sectors, and really find out what works. Because there's a lot of books like that, but they tend to, every chapter starts with, on a cool November day in 1994, Chris Baker realized that and I'm like, those are great, but there's been so many of them now, and I'm confident
Oh,
I can
yeah.
do something that's a little bit different in that sort of cross-sector teams stuff. So that's a big dream for me for one day.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And I think you're right. Yeah, whenever I listen to like those really what seem to be kind of pivotal books that everyone's reading, they seem to have spent like a couple of years going around and interviewing and observing and spending time in organizations. And of course, you would need some sort of sabbatical and then access to that stuff, wouldn't you? Tell me a bit about how are you traveling across the States? What's the mode of transport?
Well, I'm going to overlap with one of my later questions, actually, but one of the books that changed my life, and it's like a really, adults will probably look at it and think, oh, it's really silly and overly romanticized, but it's called On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and it's set in the 50s in the States, and it is like one of the first big American road trip novels. So he actually, because it's the 50s and everything's a bit simpler, then he just hitchhikes across most of the
Wow.
states. Yeah. Which is super cool, but it's definitely going to be some sort of camper van living in type job, because again, the roads are so massive there, so you wouldn't feel like, oh crap, I can't navigate these like West Country roads in this massive camper. So yeah, it'd definitely be some sort of, and then you can kind of stop off whenever you need to. Yeah, that's the dream. That'd be a cool thing to
Love
do.
it. I didn't know if you were going to say you were going to be like a Harley guy or a soft top Mustang or something like
Well, I'd love to do those for short bursts, but for like if it's going to be like a 3 or 6 month, then I'd probably want a few more comforts around me as
that.
well.
Yeah, Probably a safer bet.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's keep cracking on then. So the next one we're going to talk about is your second ignition point. And this one you've called Finding Books. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, I guess I was lucky actually because my adopted parents always read to me a lot when I was a kid, and I can remember being read to, like having The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings read to me a lot, and then reading them from a really really young age myself, like on repeat, as well, and that was great. It was such a good grounding. I think in anything, if you can find a love of reading early, that's just you're
Yeah.
set for life, really, aren't you? But I guess when I was going through that difficult spell of 16, 17, when I was like, oh, I just feel really different. I don't really know where I fit in. I just found books was like the ultimate investment of my time. And On the Road by Kerouac was like a big seminal one for me, but I just got really hooked to like 20th century and 19th century classics.
Right.
And I think I just found it the ultimate way to unwind and escape into different worlds and different cultures. And um, I think it was probably like basically my form of therapy. That was my therapist as a teenager, was finding really great books and feeling this massive sense of awe and wonder when I would look at, the list of Penguin classics.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, there's like a lifetime's work of incredible books here. This is like, I mean, I've got a real sweet tooth. So for me, this is like looking at a giant wall of pick and mix and
Yeah.
going, there's enough here for me to try something new every day for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I'm still working through like the list of classics now, and I read so many. So I've literally just picked up from my local library in Dorking the original Victor Hugo version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is actually just called Notre Dame of Paris. So it's like, right, that's another one ticked off. And so for me, finding books changed a lot because it just meant that I found my thing that just calmed me down, got me focused, and it's still probably, apart from sports, probably my biggest hobby today, I would say.
Wow. And I mean, we haven't talked about this, but that idea of that flow state, where you are doing something that is challenging and enjoyable, and you get that sort of you lose track of time. Does that happen with the reading?
Totally, yeah, totally. And nowadays that happens with non-fiction kind of reading as well. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that kind of flow state is incredible, isn't it? Because you're both relaxed and at ease, but also kind of hyper focused in at the same time. So yeah, for sure.
Trying to balance that. Um, Again, I mean, we were both at the Festival of Education, and I went and saw TJ Power talk about sort of brain chemicals. So there's a book called The Dose Effect, sort of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And in that, he talks about how the world we live in now is really hard on our kind of brain chemicals, and one of the ways to combat that is to find a way to get into the flow state, not as often as possible, but certainly regularly. Um, and it got me thinking. Yeah, I suppose different people have different ways of doing that. For some people, it's reading. For some people, it's a TV show. For some people, it's exercise. I mean, I always used to joke. When people say, "Oh, you go to the gym a lot," and why is that? And I say, "Well, when I'm trying to lift weights I shouldn't be lifting and they're above my head, I'm not thinking about the bills or the problems. I'm thinking if this weight hits me in the head, I'm going to be in trouble." And so it's almost relaxing in a strange way. But it it reminds me a little bit of what we talked earlier about how, as leaders, if we know that the world is volatile and all those sorts of things, and actually our roles are challenging because of those things, we almost need to create ways of getting into flow state by design. But also what you talked about before about kind of, doing stuff like sharing with other people and just almost, yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently about how we shouldn't probably leave excellence to chance. We should probably like design it maybe.
Mm. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why whenever I kind of do a talk about teams, I always talk about team learning being like the team superpower, because the number of times, I mean, we learn on the job with our debriefs and our looking at our core work, but some of the most energizing and fun and joyful experiences I've had in teams that I lead is when we're doing some learning together. And there are loads of methods to do that. But that's when I feel like things really come to life and you kind of light fires for people and open up new doors for them and the team's work. And so I always talk to teams about like, what are you learning as a group together this year? I know what you're making and doing, but what are you learning together? That's often for me what really gets teams working well and hopefully entering that kind of state for themselves.
I love that. Amazing. Well, I don't know if you want to try, but I'm not going to try and pronounce the psychologist who came up with flow state. It's mentally high, I think. But if you put flow state in Google, people, you'll be able to trip over it. So now we're going to move on to the second launchpad, which is obviously right up Sam's street and hilarious. I mean, there could only be really one person who was going to choose this one, but as a bit
I
of
was
a
hoping it would still be free when I was
yeah.
I was trying to
I
remember the
would have
numbers you sent me to the book. I was flicking through the
let
numbers.
you
I heard
do
that one
it anyway.
through.
It's certainly a hilarious thing, which me and Sam spoke about offline before we came on, is that we'd already had a previous conversation before, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months ago, when I was kind of bending Sam's ear about, team models and stuff like that. And rightly so, maybe he'll talk a bit more about this idea of him not being particularly, fond of prescribed models. And of course, we know, don't we, that old Dylan Williams said, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And again, I think that's kind of where I come from. I'm very aware of my, as we know with the infographics, sort of desire for clarity and sort of dislike of messiness. But so this was really my attempt. It came about because some people in my trust wanted to do some team coaching. So naturally, I said, "Great, yeah, we can do that." But they then said, what does an effective team look like? And sadly, Sam's book wasn't out at that point, so I was, left to my own devices. And I just did a load of, like you do, read everything I could find, looked at every model I could find, and tried to find some sort of synergy, I suppose. And so this launchpad was more about me kind of crystallizing a potential way of thinking about teams in terms of their effectiveness and their characteristics. And in the confidence book, I talk a bit about how one of the, I guess, ways that people come to a level of collective efficacy is their belief in the strength of the different characteristics. So let's have a look at these in more general. So, I'll read it out, but again, for those that are watching, you'll be able to see it. And so some of the characteristics that I tripped across that were common across the different models were things like alignment, clarity, trust, expertise, diversity, efficiency, commitment, and accountability. And if we go into those in a bit more detail with this view of, as you're listening to this, maybe thinking about where the areas of strength or where the areas of weakness are in the team that you've got, both in terms of you knowing kind of, that might be a reason why we're not performing as well as we are. But from my point of view, from a team development, you may find some areas that you could kind of work on. And so, it's very common, isn't it, that it talks about this idea that, really effective teams have a common purpose and they have shared goals, almost wrapped up in the definition of a team, I suppose. The next one, which I think is really interesting, is this idea that, there is real clarity in effective teams around the definition of each person's role. And this is something that actually causes me, and, Sammy might feel the same, as you move into a trust role, sometimes the edges of those roles can be quite fluffy and quite sort of blurry. And I've really struggled over the years knowing what actually is my job. Certainly as we've pushed on and been sort of one of the first trusts to try new things, it's always a bit like, And then we talked about before this idea of open communication, are people safe enough to be vulnerable enough to ensure that there is clarity and people are saying what they mean? I mean, that leads obviously strongly into trust, and so both kind of psychological safety, so being able to trust that you can be yourself. I put team efficacy in here again. Do you trust the other people around you enough to kind of make you think that the team could be good? I'm really interested in obviously in the expertise. I guess effective teams have what they require in terms of knowledge, skills, and experience. And then the diversity one is really interesting because it's not just about a kind of demographic diversity, but a bit like what Sam was saying earlier. Have you got the safety and the right people so that there's a diversity of thinking? It's rare that innovation occurs when everyone's thinking the same way. So I guess if you can pull together people with cognitive differences, then you might leverage something. And then, again, I think I can't remember who said this. I listened to David Pendleton the other day, and he was talking about kind of spiky leaders, rounded teams. That this idea that great teams have complementary expertise. They're not all great at one thing. They're all great at slightly different things. And so then collectively they're kind of great. And then you get into what I usually say is some of the unsexy things. People don't talk about this stuff, do they? About efficiency. Really interestingly, the team coaching that I did with a group of sort of leaders from my trust, because it was a coaching kind of format, they were able to select areas that they wanted to talk about in each coaching session. And we just kept coming back to efficiency nearly all the time. All they wanted to talk about was about the fact that the systems they were using and the way they were using them wasn't efficient. And of course, when you dig deeper, their big problem was, I don't have enough time to do my job as well as I want to. And then you backtrack and they didn't have enough time because the systems they were using weren't efficient enough, and so on and so on. So that's a really interesting one. And then it stands to, it's very obvious, isn't it, that highly effective teams are really kind of strong in terms of engagement and resilience. And then they have a level of kind of accountability where expectations are super high. And they have got systems in place that, hold them and each other to account. So that was my sort of, foray into characteristics. But tell us what we should have on there, Sam.
No, that's all in the mix. That's all on the highest leveraged research. You kind of covered there, absolutely. And there's decades and decades and decades of very robust research for every single one of those headings. Interestingly, I had a whole chapter of my book written on diversity, and I took it out about 2 or 3 weeks before the publication of the book.
Wow.
Because some of the research talks about, and you can do those personality test stuff, but I don't think schools have enough money for that most of the time. Some of the research is about looking at the existing makeup of your team and thinking about how those complementary things work well together. But a lot of it's about hiring and onboarding people with diverse, cognitive and cultural diversity, which have varying different effect sizes. And I remember at the time being like, oh, bloody hell, I just cannot find a physics or a computing teacher. And there are loads of other shortage subjects. And actually, I've got to the point in the last few years, if we get one candidate that's suitable, I'm like, that's a right result. So I actually just felt like I couldn't write an education that write a whole chapter about choosing from a diverse pool of candidates, because it's like, well, no one can take anything from that. Maybe if you're hiring a PE teacher, you could. So I actually just deleted it, and I thought, well, if I ever write a non-school book in the future, I've got this chapter with loads of research in, but I just binned it.
I mean, I think that's probably a wise thing, because I think that's that is an idealized situation, isn't it, where you've got enough candidates that are high quality enough that you do get to pick and choose.
Yes, that's diversity. And I think it is useful to put stuff into simple models and actually that create clarity. That's really important. What some when you're sitting through leadership training and there's like a really complex model in front of you, like arrows going left, right, and center, and you're like, oh, actually, it's taken me more time to understand this model than it just does the actual principle behind the model. So that's when I tend to lose my rag a little bit when I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like everything you've got up there. And I was trying to. We've hired this marketing lead at our trust in the last year, and she's got
Okay.
a corporate marketing background. And I've always thought I'm really good at like packaging messages and distilling it down, but she's like super strict with me and our CEO about like, people can't remember more than three things. It's like tried and tested, like get rid of your six values, get it down to three, all that kind of stuff. So I've been trying to think recently like how I could take the five kind of pillars of my teamwork. It's not really a model that I created. It's just like five areas that are all batch. So I've been trying to think about that. So I'm trying to distill it down to three. One which is like the more relational, like
Okay.
the connect and the aligning around belonging and shared goals. The next one would be like what you and I both call it the unsexy stuff, like the operations.
Yeah.
And the other one would be growth, which is like evaluation, CPD, increasing levels of expertise,
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And so yeah, I've been trying to think about how we can distill it down even further.
I really like that. And I was talking to, I've been doing lots of work in our trust recently with developing teaching and learning frameworks. And of course, it's a strange one because you've got to have enough detail in the framework so that people reach, a good level of clarity, but not enough detail that they become overwhelmed or it's inaccessible. And someone said to me, I hadn't phrased it this way before, but almost they said, "Oh, it's a bit like sort of Russian dolls." And I said, "All right." And they said, "Well, you've got like a small amount of information at the beginning, and then you can unpack that in increasing levels of detail." And I wonder whether that's an interesting way to think about that. That you may be able to distill yours down to three as almost like a gateway into the rest of them, and people they gain some confidence and resilience, I suppose, by only having to deal with three, which allows them to then go deeper and not give up.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I guess I'm always trying to be super sensitive that people I feel like have always we're at an all-time high of information output. Um, and the more you give people, you're just setting them up to fail, or you're setting up your hard work to fail because people won't actually be able to take the time. They don't have any to chew through all the multitude of frameworks and principles that we give them.
Yeah,
So, um,
absolutely.
yeah, so if you're going to do it, it's got to be memorable and it's got to be useful. Otherwise, what's the point?
Love it. Amazing. All right. Well, we're coming to the end, sadly, but we've got one last Fast Friends question. And this one you've chosen, it says, when did you last cry in front of another person? So tell us a bit about
Yeah, I thought I'd choose one that's not like a natural fit for me because I'm like my friends and family often say I can be a little bit robotic when it comes
that. Okay.
to emotional stuff. So I think I'll rack that up with my adoption issues. Um, I really internalize stuff, and sometimes I don't think other people I've learned over in recent years can tell how I'm thinking or feeling about something, even if I am thinking or feeling something quite intense. Like it doesn't show, and I don't kind of outwardly react. I tend to like inwardly consider it, and sometimes people find that frustrating because they think that like I'm not reacting in a way that might show that I do care about a situation or whatever. Um, so, and my kids always say that I don't cry in films, but I actually do. So, I've been showing them a few like 90s classics,
Okay.
um, because you actually have to check really carefully. I don't know if you ever like on things like Common Sense Media. Quite a lot of stuff when you think back like some of those 90s films, like Uncle Buck or My Girl or
Yeah.
whatever, you think, oh,
Yeah.
wasn't that just great innocent family fun? And you put
Yeah.
it on and there's like sexual harassment, there's
Yeah.
like smoking drugs, there's like
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
really like derogatory terms for people. You're like, how did this get through? So then you're kind of backpedaling, but I tried to show them a few films that do make me like do I say break me, that's probably the really
Sure.
awful terminology to use, isn't it? It's like proper
Yeah.
like toxic masculine. Like I was like, that film absolutely breaks me. No, but my most recent one was actually, you might be aware that I'm a big Crystal Palace fan,
Yeah. We know
and
that.
I couldn't go to the FA Cup final because both my boys had their team's home football tournament that day,
Yeah. Right.
like a whole day. matches and like awards and all that kind of stuff. And there was just no way we'd ever would have got to Wembley, on time. So I said, right, lads, we'll do your football tournament, and then we'll come back and watch it on the TV at home, and have dinner in front of the TV and stuff. And obviously, Palace took the lead fairly early in the game, and then we're just clinging on for dear life for the whole time. I felt quite emotionally numb throughout the game because you're just thinking, well, I've seen this story before.
Yeah.
We concede 2 goals in the last 10 minutes. I was there at the 2016 FA Cup final where we got to extra time in Man U, and bloody Jesse Lingard pops one in the top corner in the last minute of extra time. But anyway, at the end of the game, I just started crying. Like you just like without even really thinking about it very much, and my family were like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Look, I've been there for 2 different times. We've been into administration. I had a season ticket. I've been around the country. I was there on Tuesday night in like 2001, where Fogg against Burnley called off the game like 60 minutes in, and it was absolutely atrocious football anyway." And it was just really, I surprised myself because I love that club, but I never thought I'd be kind of moved to tears at a football game that I wasn't even at in person. So that was my latest one. That was like, when was that? Mid.
I love that, and there's something quite powerful in, I guess, communicating to your kids that tears don't always come because of sadness, of sadness. That you can cry for all kinds of reasons.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I really tried to narrate that with my kids. It's easier said than done, though, isn't it? But I'd really tried to narrate the like, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be really, really happy. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be annoyed for a whole day and not understand why, as long as we communicate about it. So hopefully that was a good modelling experience.
I've been it's what I've read it a while back, but there's a book called Shift by I think it's Eric Cross, I think. It's about emotions, and fascinating. And one of the bits that stuck with me when I was listening to it is that idea that if you catch yourself feeling really strong emotions like crying, you need to almost sit in that, because it's a signal that whatever it is that caused it it affected you emotionally, and that's worth exploring a bit. I had one recently, not that this is about me, but where I was watching some YouTube thing, and the guy was talking about his dad dying, and for some reason, I literally was, and I wasn't sad because of that guy. I think it dawned on me that, wow, like that's going to happen to me at some point, and I don't think, I'm in that stereotypical kind of relationship where I haven't told my dad all the things I probably will regret not telling him, And I started crying. I thought, why are you crying? And then I thought, well, clearly this is something that you need to think about a bit more. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
stuff.
no, I think it. Yeah, that's a really good point. It does often link with stuff close to home, like Matilda. That just gets me every time, that film. I think it's the adoption thing.
Right.
That one, I've got a really special place in my heart for that book, and I think they've done a really good job actually with the more recent adaptation they did of it, and the older one as well. I just absolutely love that one. It does get me.
Well, I think that's probably, for us for people that lead teams and things like that, if somebody in your team is outwardly showing some emotion, then we need to see that as a signal that either they want to communicate something or they're feeling something that they could do with maybe some support with.
Yeah, there's a great book actually by Dan Cable. What is it called? It's Alive at Work. That's what it's called.
Okay.
And he recommends an activity. I think he's like a social psychologist kind of thing. He recommends an activity for teams to do, which sounds a bit like soft team building-y, but can be really powerful. And it's to, if you're doing like a team meeting or a team building day where you do like, right, when at work and in life, am I like, do I feel the best version of myself? And what do I think that looks like in terms of how I behave? Like, i.e., I just had a really great assembly with my year group, and I think actually that means I really come out of myself and I'm having great conversations or whatever. And then the room all shares that. And the idea is you can recognize and anticipate what will bring the best out of each other, but also then recognize each other's behaviors when But then you flip it around as well and say, well, which times at work do I find bring up my worst feelings, and how do I think that impacts my behaviors? And again, people like, it's really interesting what people come up with. And like, well, sometimes if I feel like someone's let me down at work, I get really snappy and I just lock myself away in my room for a couple of days and don't really want to talk to anyone. And you
Wow.
can be really surprised at what people actually say. And then again, same thing, you can be aware of other people's feelings and behaviors and anticipate them, but also know what to do because they've talked you through it before.
Love it.
So it's like called the best and worst version of yourself. And it sounds really like simple, but actually that it really enhances that kind of, well, again, I guess it's like shared understanding, and could improve your collective efficacy because you understand the way that people process and do things. So that's
Ah,
one to try out.
well, there you go. That's a perfect way to end, for people to go away and try that, in their teams. So tell us a bit about kind of what you've got going on. You've got the Power of Teams book. The blog is really kind of on fire at the moment.
Yeah, I probably went about a year after publishing the book of just not writing anything and being like really annoyed at myself, but not having the hunger to write for a bit. And amassing, I've got Google alerts for loads of different search terms of like research. So it's like massively building up in this big file,
Yeah.
and feeling swamped. But then I've just got back into it. I wrote a 3-part series on psychological safety about a month ago because I felt like it was really mutating in education and other sectors, and people were using it in such a buzzword, overly simplified way. So I was like, I've got to write something that sort of goes some way to addressing that. And I'm not actively working on a book draft right now, but I've got 2 projects that I'm about to start moving forward with.
Okay.
So kind of watch this space.
Amazing. And people can connect with you on LinkedIn. It's samcrome.com for the blog and the website.
Yep. And that's got an email
Yeah.
address on it as well. So please, if I love hearing from people going, oh, I'm a team leader and I just want to have a bit of a chat about this. I'm like, great, let's get stuck in, because I always learn something from those conversations.
Amazing. Well, for all the listeners, thanks for coming. Thanks to Sam for having it. Again, connect with Sam on the socials. And if you enjoyed the Leadership Launchpad stuff, then connect with me, grab the book, all that sort of stuff. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, Chris.